Are you the Christian we think you are? All right.
I
Then
am.
it's live now. It's not Memorex. You're in the cloud. As I said, I'd like to welcome everyone for another rendition of a Design for Living big book study where we gather together on a weekly basis as a part of the Big Book Compendium to discuss a book that has brought revolutionary changes in the world and to those about us. We are currently on page 156. We are in A Vision for You. We are in the middle of the page. What we finished up to give just a rendition of what we discussed last week. Bill Wilson's meeting with Dr. Bob. Dr. Bob goes on an American Medical Association convention. He doesn't do too well. He gets drunk, comes home. Bill Wilson almost leaves town and goes back to New York. But he stays. Dr. Bob has one surgery in the morning. Bill gives him a couple, maybe a sedative and a couple beers to calm his nerves. And all of a sudden he doesn't come home until way later in the day. And they feared that he went on a drunk. And what he did is he came home and he announced that he had gone out and told everyone the secret that he had been keeping, that he was an alcoholic. That was considered a menace for him because he had been being deceitful. He never had a drink from that day on. And it says that by the time of writing this book, he means a great deal. Dr. Bob now means a great deal to the people of his community, and major liabilities of 30 years of hard drinking have been repaired in full. I guess if the book was if the fellowship was 6 years old, it would have said 6, but let's assume that they were writing it in real time. But life was not easy for the two friends. Plenty of difficulties presented themselves. Both saw that they may keep spiritually active. One day they called up the head nurse of a local hospital. They explained their need and inquired if she had a first-class alcoholic prospect. She replied, yes, we've got a corker. He's just beaten up a couple of nurses. Goes off his head completely when he's drinking, but he's a good chap when he's sober. Though he's been in here 8 times in the last 6 months. Understand he was once a well-known lawyer in town, but just now we've got him strapped down tight. And then this is referring to Bill W. and Dr. Bob's first visit to AA number 3, which was Bill Dodson. That's the picture you see, 2 men and a man on the bed, 3 men on the bed. Here was the prospect, all right, but by the description, none too promising. The use of spiritual principles in such cases were not so well understood as it is now. But one of the friends said, put him in a private room, we'll be down. 2 days later, a future fellow of Alcoholics Anonymous stared glassily at the stranger's beside his bed, excuse me. Who are you fellows and why this private room? I've always been in a ward before. Said one of the visitors, we're giving you a treatment for alcoholism. Hopelessness was written large on the man's face as he replied, oh, but that's no use. Nothing would fix me. I'm a goner. The last 3 times I got drunk on the way home from here. I'm afraid to go out the door. I can't understand it. All right, so he's identified that he's in a hopeless state of mind and body. He's been in and out of this place 8 times in the last 6 months. Some of us that can identify with that, some of us have that experience going into the halls and the meeting rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, not realizing that crossing over the threshold is no different than going to detox. It doesn't relieve me of my alcoholism. It puts me in a position where hopefully, by God's grace, I'll hear the message and follow the path. It's very important that we notice that, because sometimes it's easy to sit in the rooms and maybe judge other alcoholics or feel like we're beyond even the scope of Alcoholics Anonymous, because we've come to the meetings and we've drank again, and we've come to the meetings and we've drank again. Absolutely, Elizabeth. Yeah, you're going to share no matter what. Anyhow, so I wanted to bring you up to speed. We read a little bit about the story. Some good things are about to happen. We're about to find out a miracle. Keep in mind, Dr. Bob's sober about 2 weeks to 16 days at this time, and they're making a 12-step call, Jesse. They don't need to have a year sober to go reach out to another alcoholic. Elizabeth.
Absolutely. Elizabeth Alcoholic. I absolutely love that paragraph on page 156 where it says, life was not easy for the 2 friends. plenty of difficulties presented themselves. Bill saw they must keep spiritually active. And what did they do? Did they call their sponsor? Did they go to a meeting and complain? Did they call 10 people and complain about what's happening in their life? No, absolutely not. They find someone to help. Absolutely number one. And how many years, decades in AA I have been where this was not emphasized, wasn't talked about, or there was some mysterious milestone you had to reach out in the future before you could do this. No, as Bill said, what did he have? A little over 2 weeks, you know? And I'm so grateful to be part of a home group that emphasizes we don't care if you're on day 1 or 2, go talk to if I don't need a lot of time to think about me. I need to keep spiritually active. How do I do that? Fastest way, go help another alcoholic. How many people are out there on, one of the hardest days I usually hear about is day 3, right? That's the day the body is craving that alcohol so badly, and getting through each hour. Go babysit somebody on day 3. I don't care what day you're on. Go help that person, and get out of yourself. And we know the people that have too much time to think about themselves. You can hear it. I hear it every day in a meeting. I heard it earlier today. It was like, and my first question always is, are you working with anybody? Are you helping anybody? Are you calling any newcomers? Or do you have any numbers of people to check on, to go see how they're doing every time? And I don't need a lot of time to think about me. I just don't. It never goes well, ever. I am out there looking for people to work with. I put my number out there constantly. I tell people, I want to hear from you. I will check on you. I will, give me your number and I'll go check on them. And it's beautiful. It's amazing. And it's so fast. It's such a fast way out of any trouble. And then, I love what it says. I noticed that they wait a couple days. They let this guy get a little bit detoxed, and we're talking about the big book is often dealing with low bottom cases, in the first 164. They only briefly mention the people that may have gotten here in time, right? There's a few references to that, but a lot of the cases they're talking about back then were the low bottoms that needed, a little bit of, little detoxing before they could even talk to people, right? Anyway, back to you, Bill. I just wanted to point that out. And I'm so glad that we have this, we're hearing the message more and more and more that, I need to get out there and help people. And that needs to be the first thing, not the last thing. You're muted.
Of course I am. The bottom of page 156 and 150 says something very powerful. The use of spiritual principles in such cases was not so well understood as it is now. So they're going into a medical facility. They're coming under the authority of a power greater than themselves that they're not so sure is going to work. I mean, Bill's sober about 6 months at the time, and he's been trying to give this away to a whole bunch of people who really didn't seem interested. And you got Bob, who's shaky with a couple weeks sober. I refer to Roman numeral XXII, forward to the 3rd edition. In spite of the great increase in the size and span of this fellowship, at its core, it remains simple and personal. Each day, somewhere in the world, recovery begins when one alcoholic talks with another alcoholic, sharing experience, strength, and hope. I don't know if that principle was 2 or more of us are gathered, God is in the midst. They used to do 12-step calls in pairs, just in case one got thirsty or blindsided by a drunk who might have been a little reluctant to get the message. But nonetheless, when we carry the message, something comes alive inside of us. Hopelessness. Oh, for an hour, the two friends told him about their drinking experiences over and over. He would say, "That's me. That's me. I drink like that." The man in the bed was told of the acute poisoning from which he suffered, how it deteriorates the body of an alcoholic and warps his mind. There was much talk about the mental state preceding the first drink. "Yes, that's me," said the sick man, "the very image. You fellows know your stuff all right, but I don't see what good it'll do. You fellows are somebody. I was once, but I'm a nobody now. From what you tell me, I know more than ever I can't stop. At this, both the visitors burst into a laugh, said the future fellow anonymous. Damn little to laugh about that I can see. I think it's important, and it talks about it in working with others, that we stress the hopelessness of alcoholism, and that's what they did here. They didn't talk to the man. They talked to him, but they didn't talk at him. They talked to him about themselves and their drinking, because that's the predication. It's not to tell the guy what he needs to do. They're going to describe their condition and then tell him what they've done. And they also talked about the subtle insanity that precedes the first drink, because that's the crux of the problem. This man knows that once he takes a drink, he ends up in a booby hatch. He's done it 8 times in 6 months. What he doesn't understand is why, when he goes to get sober, does he leave the very thing that treated his drunkenness and picks up a drink on the way home from the hospital. Elizabeth?
All right, I was hoping we'd move on from that one.
Do you want me
I
to
was,
read on?
yeah,
Okay,
yeah, that'd be
no
good.
problem. The 2 friends spoke of their spiritual experience and told him about the course of action they carried out. He interrupted, I used to be strong for the church, but that won't fix it. I've prayed to God on hangover mornings and sworn that I'd never touch another drop, but by 9 o'clock I'd be boiled as an owl. Next day found the prospect more receptive. He had been thinking it over. Maybe you're right, he said. God ought to be able to do anything. Then he added, he sure didn't do much for me when I was trying to fight this booze racket alone. On the 3rd day, the lawyer gave his life to the care and direction of his creator. On day number 3, he takes step 3 and said he was perfectly willing to do anything necessary. His wife came, scarcely daring to be hopeful, though she thought she saw something different about her husband already. He had begun to have a spiritual experience. Remember what Bill Wilson noticed in Evie's eyes? The strange boy was on fire. He had that starry-eyed look, something about his eyes. He was different. He had been rearranged. And this guy realizes that an important statement is, I was trying to fight this booze racket alone, and God seemed to have no power in my life. Again, we need each other to stay sober. It's about getting outside of oneself, giving to the other, helping another. Is that enough for you to chew on yet, Elizabeth?
Oh, sorry about that. Yeah. No, I thought you went back up. Sorry, I've spaced a little bit. It's been a busy day already, you guys. I'm sorry. No, I didn't know that you'd already gone through the drinking experiences, and how that gave him hope, because he saw, wait a minute, you guys have been through this, and that was such a novel experience. It was for me. I remember when I first got here, and I thought you guys were reading my mind. Like, how in the heck? I thought people got together before the meeting and figured out what I was like stressing about that day. And then I go to the meeting and they were all talking about it. I literally thought they were doing that somehow. And what a beautiful thing for him to see for the first time. And also, how many times have you suffered from something and you didn't even know what it was? And then when you found out what it was, now there's hope. Wait a minute. I have this illness. No wonder my willpower didn't work. Oh my gosh. So these people are getting new information. It's brand new then, right? They don't even know. I don't even know if they've gotten any of the classifications from the medical association at that time yet. That hasn't happened yet. So they were all thinking, well, I suck and I don't have any willpower, right? Woe is me. And now they're saying, no, you don't. That's not the issue. The issue is you have a disease, and it's really hard to conquer. And I love, God, when you see people when they're in their early days and they're beating themselves up because they're not functioning better, or whatever. And it's like, no, this is hard. I tell them your body's still healing. This early sobriety is not easy. Please put the whip away, be gentle with yourself, because it's hard and this is not easy. And I just love to see how their faces change when they know, wow, I'm not only am I starting to understand what I've been going through, but I can find out that I don't have to do this by myself, you know? And then we tell them about, how it worked for us. And it's just so different. And then the whole thing about, we see, people that are in AA, we can see the difference between the people who are willing to do whatever it takes, right? I see it. If I tell them, hey, there's a good speaker at 2 o'clock, if they're able to go and they don't have some lame excuse, right? They're showing up for everything I suggest. They're on it, they're reading their step work, they're finding out what they need to do, and versus I'd send my sponsor notes all the time, thanking her for putting up with me in the early days, because then we got the yeah buts, the ones that know everything and don't need to learn anything, and a lot of times they got to take a few more hits before they're quite willing, doing Bills Anonymous instead of Alcoholics Anonymous or something, I love that when you can see they're so, I have some ladies right now that are so earnest and so eager, and they're really wanting this way of life. It's beautiful, absolutely beautiful. Okay, back to you, Bill.
Very good. And it's interesting, my friend points out all the time at meetings, he really loves this line that his wife came scarcely daring to be hopeful. So I'm sure something was conveyed to her, maybe in his excitement, that there were other people that knew about what his condition. He might have called her and she comes in and says, okay, something's different, but guess what? I'm going to be reluctant at best. And she comes in and she notices something different about him already. That afternoon, he put on his clothes and walked from the hospital a free man. He entered a political campaign making speeches, frequenting men's gathering places of all sorts, often staying up all night. He lost the race by only a narrow margin, but he had found God. And in finding God, he had found himself. That was in June of 1935. That's why we know that Dr. Bob was sober not much more than 2 weeks, because he got sober in June of 1935. He never drank again. He too has become a respected and useful member of his community. He has helped other men recover and is a power in the church from which he was long absent. So you see, there were 3 alcoholics in that town who now felt they had to give to others what they had found or be sunk. After several failures to find others, a 4th turned up. He came through an acquaintance who had heard the good news. He proved to be a devil-may-care young fellow whose parents could not make out whether he wanted to stop drinking or not. They were deeply religious people, much shocked by their son's refusal to have anything to do with the church. He suffered horribly from his sprees, but it seemed as if nothing could be done for him. He consented, however, to go to the hospital where he occupied the very room recently vacated by the lawyer. He had 3 visitors. After a bit, he said, the way you fellows put this spiritual stuff makes sense. I'm ready to do business. I guess the old folks were right after all. So one more was added to the fellowship. Anything there? Read on a little bit.
Oh yeah. Yeah, look at where it says, um, who felt they had to give to others what they had found or be sunk. Had to. Again, are you working with anyone? Are you helping anybody? Literally, if anyone's struggling in this program, please look at that side of the triangle, the service side. Are you helping? Are you out there helping AA? Are you helping keep the doors open? Are you helping other alcoholics? Are you out there carrying the message to somebody? I mean, that just, it's emphasized over and over, right? What is it? There's 2 places there's one in the forward to the 2nd edition and another in Bill's story. Like, I have to be out there helping others if I want to have permanent sobriety, period. I mean, that's just it, right? I can't stop. So I just love how it's emphasized again. Those are, I always say, when in the big book, when they use italics, right? Because they cost more. When they use strong adjectives or strong words, or when they repeat something over and over, right? They're not saying we should or that we might. It says we had to or be sunk. that's still true. It doesn't stop being true. I really like that that's pointed out again. And then it says that they had failures, but guess what? I'm staying sober. And I definitely remind my sponsees when their sponsees aren't staying sober, I'm like, but you are, you know? That's it. Thanks, Bill.
Beautiful. All this time, our friend of the hotel lobby incident remained in that town. He was there 3 months. He now returned home, leaving behind his first acquaintance, the lawyer and the devil-may-care chap. These men had found something brand new in life. Though they knew they must help other alcoholics if they would remain sober, that motive became secondary. It was transcended by the happiness they found in giving for others. They shared their homes, their slender resources, and gladly devoted their spare hours to fellow sufferers. They were willing by day or night to place a new man in the hospital and visit him afterward. They grew in numbers. They experienced a few distressing failures, but in those cases, they made an effort to bring the man's family into a spiritual way of living, thus relieving much worry and suffering. So now what we're getting is almost they're reiterating what we discussed in chapter 7, 8, and 9 for sure. Working with others, chapter to the wives and the family afterwards. So even if the drunk didn't find this way of life, they would offer the spiritual approach to the family members. I'll read one more paragraph, Elizabeth. I'm sure you have something to say about this. A year and 6 months later, these three had succeeded with 7 more. Seeing much of each other, scarce an evening passed that someone's home did not shelter a little gathering of men and women, happy in their release and constantly thinking how they might present their discovery to some newcomer. In addition to these casual get-togethers, it became customary to set apart one night a week for a meeting to be attended by anyone or everyone interested in a spiritual way of life. Aside from fellowship and sociability, the prime object was to provide a time and place where new people might bring their problems. So, if my math serves me correctly, even though they had growing in numbers, it's a year and 6 months later. So at the very least, it's the end of 1936 or the beginning of 1937. Bill Wilson has gone to New York, and what remains in Akron, Ohio is 10 sober people joining this no-name fellowship. There's 19 people on this platform right now where Alcoholics Anonymous is a household name. I can take it or leave it. If I don't like this meeting, I go over to a Beacon group. It doesn't, now I'm going to go to Kentucky where Elizabeth and her people talk with the Twain. It doesn't matter. I've got options today. They didn't have options, but if you realize how slow and how critical every turn and every move they made was for this thing to be here for us today. I don't know if I could stay sober if there were only 10 alcoholics in my town. And the importance where it says they gave up their slender resources and opened their homes. They knew that they had been spared from catastrophe. Most of us come in here complaining about what brought us here, right? The lawyer, the lover, the liver, the labor board. Someone made me come here to do something about a problem that I don't want to really admit that I have because I fit the description in chapter 3. Most of us have been unwilling to admit we got this thing. I don't want to have this thing. You know why? Not because I got to take the steps and help other people the rest of my life. I have no idea what that's coming. It's because I don't want to give up my baba. I want to be able to drink when things get hectic all around me. Elizabeth?
Oh my God, you're cracking me up. The lawyer, the lover, the liver. I've never heard that before. I just wrote it down. That is awesome. I find it interesting that it says, and I'm curious, Bill, if you know about this, it says that provide a time and place where new people might bring their problems. Because, in another place, Bill W. says that our chief responsibility to the newcomer is an effective representation of our program, or I don't know the quote perfectly. I'm sure somebody in here does. And I know that there have been a lot of meetings that have a newcomers meeting half an hour before the actual meeting. I wonder what the meetings were like then. You know, we in my group, we have a pretty tight format for the main meeting, and then we invite newcomers to stay after if they want to ask questions or have any problems they want to talk about, you know, in a smaller setting. So I wonder how they handled that then. Because boy, isn't that a little argument somebody might use for an open discussion, problem dumping type meeting, you know? What do you think?
My good friend George, who came here recently to our meeting, he's here today. I won't break his anonymity live. He can do that after we turn the recording off. But he was telling me about a 2 hour and 45-minute talk he listened to by Clarence Snyder. The importance of what you just brought about is they were affiliated at the time, didn't know it was affiliation, violating traditions which weren't out yet, but they were going to Oxford group meetings. And what happened is they started to break away and spend time with the drunks, but they didn't totally withdraw from that because Dr. Bob heavily leaned into that. So once a week, guess what? Anyone with any spiritual deficiency, kind of like this meeting here, you can come here and we're going to meet you where you're at. We don't care if you identify with the problem. It wasn't for a couple of years. And I'm glad you said that, Elizabeth, because I'm sitting in an area where there's so much information that I take it for granted. When I go down to Akron to the archives, they have lists of alcoholics, their full name with their sobriety date. And if they had a relapse, it's crossed out and their due date's placed in there. It's like an old ledger, as if it was an accounting system. They talked about the groups. They have pictures of members of Alcoholics Anonymous in the late 30s or early 40s. They were all dressed up in shirt and ties and they would stand together. And I mean, this was a movement. This was a big deal for them. They had found a way out. And when George called me with that today, that's a reminder because Clarence Snyder finally broke away. He claims to be the real founding father of Alcoholics Anonymous because he had the first official AA meeting, important group, Cleveland Heights, Ohio. And I told George I would live 5 streets away from that. That was the first official meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. Although down in Akron, they say that King School is the oldest and they're willing to defend it because they met there the most, but they weren't an official AA meeting at the time. But there was a lot of stuff going on. When you hear the history about how the Akron people came up to Cleveland where the first meeting was held and they were ready to blow fists because they didn't want AA to pull away from the Oxford group because it seemed to be working. But Clarence was taking guys through the steps quickly. He didn't mess around. It was about you make a surrender, you make a confession, and you get out there, you make amends, and you start helping people. I mean, 3 or 4 days sober, they're making amends and looking for other drunks to talk to frantically. Yeah, that's my answer to that.
You want to keep reading?
Absolutely. Back up page 151. Outsiders became interested. One man and his wife placed their large home at the disposal of this strangely assorted crowd. This was a non-alcoholic couple who was so impressed with this movement that they opened up their home to these people. This couple has since become so fascinated they have dedicated their home to the work. Many a distracted wife has visited this house to find loving and understanding companionship among women who knew her problem, to hear from the lips of their husbands what had happened to them, to be advised how their own wayward mate might be hospitalized and approached when next he stumbled. This is a powerful paragraph coming up here. Many a man, yet dazed from his hospital experience, has stepped over the threshold of that home into freedom. Many an alcoholic who entered there came away with an answer. He succumbed to that gay crowd inside who laughed at their own misfortunes and understood his. Impressed by those who visited him at the hospital, he capitulated entirely. When later in an upper room of this house, he heard the story of some man whose experience closely tallied with his own. The expression on the faces of these women, the indefinable something in the eyes of the men, the stimulating and electric atmosphere of the place conspired to let him know that there was haven at last. And I'll tell you what, if you go to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous where the spirit's alive, that takes place on a regular basis. You walk in there, you can feel the energy, you hear the talking, the conversations are going on. People are laughing at the stupidest things in the world. If people from the outside came and watched what we laughed at, they would commit us. But we understand because we've been there, the fallacy of alcoholism. And I believe the word capitulated almost means like conceded, right? Or surrendered. He acquiesced, he gave in to the fact. I'm going to look it up while you share, Elizabeth.
I was just starting to do that actually. In my little compendium in the back of my book. I'm not that fast. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's what, and what a relief, right? I mean, things that we were so ashamed of. Let's see, capitulated, surrendered, gave up resistance, submitted, succumbed. Yeah. I remember the very first time I was hanging out with a girl in AA who was close to my age, and she admitted that she had done something that was worse than what I had done. And it just gave me so much relief, and I decided early in sobriety that I would live a life of transparency because it helped people, and I've continued to do that, because it does help people. It helps them see like we are not alone. We've all done this stuff, and can laugh about it now because I'm not living that way anymore. I remember one time I wasn't sure if I wrecked my car or not, and I just stood there. I'm like, did I wreck my car? My car's wrecked. Did I wreck it? I didn't know. That's pretty messed up, right? I could laugh about it now. That was what my alcoholic life looked like. Thank God I'm not living that anymore. I didn't, by the way. Someone else moved my car so it wouldn't be towed. I was in college and you had rules about parking. So, but yeah.
The
You
very
can,
go
sorry.
ahead.
No, you can feel it when,
Yeah, capitulated means to cease fighting an opponent, to surrender. So that's what many a man stepped over the threshold and capitulated. He surrendered to the fact that he had this thing. Were you done with your sharing on that
no,
paragraph?
I like what you said about you can feel it in some places. You feel that spirit, um, I love, like, I really love people who, how everybody seems to go through a rigid phase. They learn the big book and now they need to tell everybody what's in it, and it's got to be exactly like this. And I think that our principles and our traditions are like bumpers on the side of a bowling alley, and then in the middle is God. I might share something when I feel inspired that might be about ACA therapy or ACA or something in a meeting, because I feel like at that moment I'm inspired to share that. I don't know where that comes from. I don't always talk about it. I definitely talk about the fact that I've done some outside work, and I think that's part of why I'm still here. I definitely needed that help. But sometimes I don't share it, and some meetings really don't like that. Woo wee. They're like, they have even post signs at the beginning of the meeting saying, we don't use this language in our meeting, or they just say, we don't use this language. They don't say if it's their meeting or AA, which I kind of had a little issue with on that because they were sounding like they were speaking for AA. I didn't know AA limited our language. Cooperate, not affiliate. Hello. Anyway, not to go off on that tangent, but I definitely noticed the people. You can see it, like somebody said, how do you know the spiritual people in the meeting? They're the ones that are smiling all the time. They've got that. They're not here to enforce this is what it has to be on everybody else, and you can definitely feel the difference. And I just really appreciate, I just really appreciate that. And I really just want to say, Bill, I really appreciate you. You've got such a depth of understanding of this program, and so many of the information that you can pull in stuff from elsewhere. I'm sort of just getting to know you through this process, and it's really great. And I really appreciate that part because I'm a little weak there. I always say I'm really good up until about page 88, and then I get a little weak. I'm just gonna admit that. Anyway, back to you.
You were there as Bill sees it yesterday, right?
No, I wish I got up that
Okay,
early on
well,
Sunday.
well, listen, I'm gonna put a little plug in for this meeting yesterday. This guy, Bill W., not Bill Wilson from Texas.
Yeah.
He spoke. He's been sober since 72. Not that that matters. He's just been around AA for a long time. But he shared something phenomenal. And this comes to what we talked about when the electricity. You could walk into some meetings and they're actually dead. And all of us have had that experience if we've been around and gone to in-person meetings. Very few online, but some of them will put you to sleep with all the, with all this curricular that they have. But here's what he talked about. He met with the guy and he said he was, I don't know, maybe 27 years sober at the time. And it was like a lull. There was nothing happening. And he met this guy whose light was on. He knew he was awake. And the guy told him, he said, have you ever heard of the 5 M's? And I'm not going to do it in injustice. I'm going to briefly describe what he said. And if you can get a chance, the 5 M's, there you go. You like that, don't you, Paula G? So what he says is the first thing is there's a man, he says it could be Jesus, it could be Buddha, it could be Bill Wilson. It could have been any of these people. Something happens and then the message takes place and there's a transformation that people can't deny. And then a movement comes out of that. This is the same with the church. And he's talking about these were spiritual platforms. And like I said, listen to the talk because he does a much better job. But I listened to it again today. I was so impressed yesterday. And then what happens is he says, we get into the machine, the mechanics of it. We're going to read this at every meeting and we're not going to deviate. You've got to sit still. You have 2 minutes and 12 seconds to share, and we're going to set a timer. You can't talk about this and you can't talk about that. And what happens is the mechanics or the machine aspect starts to destroy the spirit. And the 5th M, Elizabeth, he calls the mausoleum. The spirit has died. Alcoholics Anonymous to keep set up. There have been times when I've gone into some churches where 30 years prior I had been there and you could feel the presence of a Holy Spirit. You could feel the weight. You could feel the presence. And all of a sudden you go there and it looks like, when are we going to cut the pews up and use them for firewood? Because there's nothing happening here. And if we are not careful, we can lose you hear about it like, well, I'm sober for 30 years. Now let the new guy do that stuff. He needs to get his feet wet. Well, I'm going to tell you what. At 30 years of sobriety, you probably have a whole lot more to lose than the guy with 2 weeks. At what point does your alcoholism go away? At 30 years, it's not time. Time does not give us immunity, tenure, or seniority in Alcoholics Anonymous. Time is never a defense against a first drink. It's what I do. It's contingent on the maintenance of my spiritual condition. And I'm the one who's got to maintain it. And you've gone to meetings, we've heard about it. I don't like to attack and say, oh my God, if I had what he had at 30 years, I'd drink, or I don't want what he has. I don't know what they're going through. And if I've never had 30 years, that's a pretty arrogant statement. But nonetheless, some people that are just almost dry that used to be on fire. And when we go to these platforms, and now you see it very readily on Zoom, we're exposed to a big deal that we might otherwise not meet these people. We're meeting, there's no such thing as a celebrity in AA, but I'm going to tell you what, there are some people who have been gifted to carry the message. But the commonality with each and every one of them, they have been involved in Alcoholics Anonymous from day one, and they've never left. They continue to do service. They sponsor, as Elizabeth said, the 3 sides of the triangle. And those are the ones where you say, wow, how come I'm not at meetings where I'm hearing that message? It's not the meeting that I'm not hearing the message from. I'm not doing what it takes for the spirit to be alive. Because I'll tell you what, if I'm doing God's work, I don't need to be hearing anything from anyone. He will give me what I need internally, because that's where he resides. But I usually keep him blocked because of my own insensitivity, laziness, and just judgment of other people that I don't want to help that guy. I'll let Jesse do it.
I wanted to say that earlier I made a little comment about problem dumping meetings, but let me tell you what, those are the meetings I came into, and I was 10 years younger than a lot of the people in the group that I came into, and I would just cry for 5 minutes and take the meeting hostage for the first 5 minutes, and they were so wonderful to me. I don't attend meetings like that today, but I will never criticize them because I'm still here. It got me to the next place. You know, I didn't really have I knew about the big book thumpers, but they scared me. So I didn't get anywhere near them for a while. You know, I knew they existed, but they seemed mean. But I definitely got with one. That's what my sponsor definitely is. And, but she emphasizes, you know, that what's really cool about the triangle is when you can compare it to the mind, body, and spirit. You know, recovery, we treat our disease of the mind with the steps. Traditions, you know, is the body. They say I take my body to a meeting, which some people say, you know, that just being around other alcoholics changes our brain. Just to hear you guys, and then the spirit is the service side. When I go out from me to you, that's when the spirit is active. That's when I feel that. And that's when I've been inspired. The first time I had the experience of like clear conscious contact that happened right in the moment was when a woman had called me and she'd heard me at a meeting, and she said, I'm having all these problems, you know, I'm on benzos, no one will sponsor me. And she sounded pretty hopeless about her life. And I'm texting my sponsor, and my sponsor's moved to rural Maine and she has no reception and she's not getting back to me because I felt like I was really out of my depth here. I don't have experience with that. I don't know what to say to this person. And I usually had all the answers, right? Usually, most of the time in my life, I think I have all the answers. And here I don't know what to say. And this woman sounds really upset. And you know what? I heard she called you, give her your experience. I remember it perfectly. I was standing outside on the deck on the back of my house. It was a sunny day. And I just started talking about the triangle. And I said, when my life sounds like yours, usually there's something I'm not doing. And I kind of quickly went over the three sides and what the actions are in each of those three. And she started laughing and she said, oh my God, you're right. I'm not doing anything. And by the next day, she'd taken action in two of the three sides. And that is where I started to have that key in that lock, open the door just a bit. I was like, wow, I can call on that. And I started to do that more and started to understand what it said in the book. I didn't get that from reading the book over and over or studying it or finding out every single thing. You know, I got it from the experience of being out there helping somebody and having that inspiration come. And that's happened to me so many times. Last night, the Bronx Big Book Study celebrated their 5-year anniversary, and Matt T, who helped found that meeting, spoke. And I remember when he was quoting actually Donna J, and he said, again, we have these gifted messengers, right? And I so appreciate them. And you know, and yeah, there's not celebrities, and sometimes we can see them get off the beam. They still carry a good message at the podium, you know, whatever, we're human. But he was quoting her, and he said, when I take the actions, God meets me halfway. And see, I had to be willing to take the actions first. And I got lucky. I was bored and lonely during COVID, and I got busy in AA service. And I have had an experience in the past 4.5 years, that I never had in the first 32 because of that. And I'm so grateful. Couldn't be, I mean, yeah, it's crazy. So I love that. I understand what that quote means today, because God has met me halfway. And I share that with people, especially who are like confused, you know, about, well, what is it all, you know, because it can sound so mysterious, this spiritual way of life. What does it mean? Does it mean I go to church? Does it, you know, and to help explain that to people, you know, hopefully your sponsor has taken you through a really effective step one experience. And for me, it had to be the second half of step one, because I got here so early, you know, and I had to see where I was the little manager. And get humbled in that part of my life so that I could want a God, that I wanted your way of life. Bill, I know you've gone through it too, right? And you know, both of us have had in later sobriety experiences where we've gotten our asses handed to us. And then we say, oh my God, you know, I got to get out of the management business and get over here and get a new manager and get God in my life. And wow, it's so cool that we get to do this. Anyway, wow, I just went off. Go ahead, take over.
That's right. I was going to say, in humility, Elizabeth won't tell you, but she is one of those speakers that is sought after and speaks at places, and people come and listen. And she knows it's not her. She's the pipe, not the well. You know, it's interesting, and thank God that I heard him yesterday speak, and that I listened to that twice again today, because here's what the book says, and it cautions us, and it is so subtle. The only easy part about this program is it is easy to let up on the spiritual program of action and rest on our laurels. And all of a sudden, I'm starting to say AA stale. Where's all the excitement? That was a boring meeting. That was a stupid topic. Where are all the people that I was getting fed from? They're still there, but guess what? It's like our friend Bob Durrell says, the transmitter's never broken. There's nothing wrong with the transmitter. God is constantly sending us signals. It's always the receiver. And guess who the receiver is? Moi, the one sitting in the receiver's seat. So, yep. Are we ready?
Yes.
And you know what? Since we're going to describe the fellowship, it's 10 till. We like to get our people in, and I've got a special announcement. We're going to stop there for right now, Elizabeth, and then you and I have to talk.
Okay.
This Saturday on the 5th of April, and I don't know if it's the 4th or the 5th anniversary of Big Book Compendium. I'm not certain, but nonetheless, it's an anniversary and a celebration we're having. Same password, same ID, if you guys want to put it on your calendar. All the people, and I don't have the flyer for that. I don't know that Elizabeth does either. Rob or Ellie, you usually put it in. The Big Book Compendium meets who knows how many times a week, a lot. But every night, at least Monday through Friday at 8 p.m., same ID, same password, noon on Monday. Howard has the Big Book study at 5:30, maybe 5 o'clock on Saturday. Or Sunday. It's just crazy what's going on in Alcoholics Anonymous if you want to get exposed to this book. And it's wonderful to learn. But if all you're doing is getting a history lesson, then like it talks about in chapter 3, some of us have read inspirational books. This is a very inspirational book, but if I don't put it into application, all it is an inspirational book. It's like me reading a book about Italy. I've never gone, so I know nothing about it. I just know it had pretty pictures and beautiful women. All right, that's enough for me today. Recording is stopped.